If we go to the beach on one sunny day, we can receive as much of those sun rays as we want. Or we can reject them. How do we reject those sun rays on a sunny day?
Sunblock.
Sunblock. Shades. An umbrella. Long sleeve shirt. A scarf around our neck. Long pants. Even though those graces or those rays are coming down continuously, we can reject them if we want, or we can accept them. It's totally our choice. Well, God gives us His grace. In kind of a similar way, He showers down graces upon us each and every day. But it's up to us to accept those graces or not. Do you realize that your next breath is a grace? You have the right to accept it or refuse it. I hope you accept it. That's God's grace. And again, it's our choice whether we accept it or not. And now, grace can be kind of classified into two intensities. The kind of grace we receive is dependent on the way God gives it. And there's two types of grace out there. By the way, do you have your handouts called Sacraments? Just to point this out, there's one called Sacraments, and I got a bunch of blanks on this one. If you want to use this as a worksheet, feel free to do so. Because some of the answers are not on here. You might want to fill them in as we go along. So, grace. Two kinds of grace. A lot of Christians aren't aware of this. There's one grace called actual grace. This is something that we're all familiar with. Everyone is familiar with this. These are the graces that God gives everyone. Do you realize all the good things in our life, all the blessings, our talents, our health, our occupation, our material possessions, even our life comes from God's grace? They do. And that's something we have to constantly be reminded of, because sometimes we just take it for granted. But really it was God who allowed it to happen, and we've accepted that grace. Actual grace is how we can live out our daily lives by having God's intervention. God gives us everything. Our next breath. We get up in the morning. All these wonderful things are by actual grace. These are the graces that we use on an everyday basis. How many of you ever prayed for a person in the hospital? A safe trip. Many other things. We are asking for God to send us His grace for a specific situation. I like to use this kind of definition. Actual grace is something that we ask God to help us with, but it is something that is used up. Think about it. You pray for recovery in an operation. You pray for a safe trip. And then it happens, and that grace is used up. Kind of an idea of what actual grace is all about. So, let's just use it. How about used up for a definition to kind of classify it? And there's so many graces, we can't even list them all. But all the many graces God gives us. Now there's another type of a grace. We call this sanctifying grace. This is a more intense grace. I like to think of it like this. You go out on a hot sunny day today, right? And God is sending down His graces, like those rays coming down. And it get kind of intense today out there, right? I almost got a sunburn today. But what happens if you went out there today and you had a magnifying glass? And let's be honest, how many of us men got those ants with the magnifying glass? Okay? What happens to that sunlight that comes down when it goes through that magnifying glass? It intensifies. That is what sanctifying grace is all about. It's an intense grace that God gives us. But this type of a grace is different from actual grace, because this is the grace that can come into our souls and it doesn't have to be used up. It can remain in our souls forever. A more intense type of a grace. So what sanctifying grace does, remember Adam and Eve? They lived in perfect fellowship with God. They sinned. They lost it. How now, because of Christ's death and resurrection, can we be restored into that relationship with God? It is through this intense grace that now we can be restored back into a relationship with Christ. And it is also through this type of grace that we can obtain additional types of intense or sanctifying grace to live out our lives as Christians. So far, so good? Make me nervous when you're so quiet.
We're asleep.
You're asleep? I have not been using this like I should, right? Okay. I'll use that to wake Julia. So, sanctifying grace is how we can be restored with that grace that allows us to have that intimate relationship with God. And I hope on the tip of your tongues is, how do I get in on the action? How do I get this sanctifying grace?
Baptism.
That leads us now to sacraments. This is what sacraments are all about. They are ways in which God gives us this intense grace. We get that. Everybody gets this. But this is the way, sacraments are the way in which you receive the sanctifying grace, or the intense type of grace that God wants you to get so that you can be in relationship with Him. And now let's just address some of the questions on our quiz here. And they'll introduce us now to sacraments. How many sacraments are there?
7.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. What are they?
Baptism.
Okay, do this slowly here. Baptism.
Reconciliation.
Confirmation.
Forgot one.
Confirmation.
Reconciliation.
Reconciliation.
Marriage. Holy order. And anointing.
And what else?
That's it. There's only 7.
Okay, just check. Okay. These are our 7 sacraments. And I just want to show you, our sacraments are broken into categories. Baptism, confirmation, Eucharist. These are sacraments of initiation. What does initiation mean? You're initiated into something. Entry.